The morning sun barely touched the horizon when Sarah Chen stood at her father's grave, clutching a worn bronze medal in her trembling hands. The medal felt cold against her palm, just as cold as the reality that Captain Michael Chen would never see her compete again. 3 months had passed since the heart attack took him. 3 months since the world of competitive shooting lost one of its finest coaches. And 3 months since Sarah lost the only person who truly believed in her potential. She remembered the last conversation they had in the hospital. His voice was weak, but his eyes burned with the same intensity she had seen countless times at the shooting range. He had pressed this very medal into her hands, the one he won at the national championships 30 years ago, and whispered words that confused her then but would soon change everything. "The training we did in secret, Sarah. That's your real foundation. Trust it when nothing else makes sense." Sarah had been shooting competitively since she was 12, guided entirely by her father's unconventional methods. While other coaches focused on textbook stances and traditional techniques, her father taught her something different. He made her shoot in complete darkness, learning to feel the weight of the gun rather than see it. He had her practice while listening to chaotic sounds through headphones, training her mind to find stillness within chaos. He even made her shoot left-handed for an entire year, though she was naturally right-handed, claiming it would make her brain more adaptable. The other shooters at the club thought Captain Chen was wasting his daughter's talent with these strange exercises. Their coaches taught proven methods, systematic approaches that produced consistent results. Sarah's scores were good but not exceptional. She qualified for regional competitions but never quite made it to the national stage. The whispers followed her everywhere. "Such a shame," they would say. With a more conventional coach, she could have been somebody. Now, standing at his grave, Sarah faced her biggest challenge yet. The national selection trials were just 4 months away. The top 3 shooters would represent the country at the international championships. It was the opportunity her father had dreamed of for her. But without his guidance, Sarah felt lost. The new coach at her club, Robert Martinez, was a decorated Olympian with a wall full of medals and a reputation for producing champions. He had already approached her about training, but there was a condition. "You'll need to forget everything your father taught you," Martinez had said bluntly. "I watched him train you, Sarah. Respectfully, his methods were outdated and too experimental. If you want to compete at the national level, you need to rebuild your technique from scratch. Start with the fundamentals that every champion knows." Sarah stood torn between 2 paths. Every logical part of her brain screamed to accept Martinez's offer. He had the credentials, the proven track record, the respect of the entire shooting community. But her heart kept returning to her father's last words, and the secret training sessions that no one else knew about. Those midnight practices where he taught her to shoot while mentally solving complex math problems. The exercises where she had to recite poetry while maintaining perfect aim. The unconventional drills that seemed to have no connection to competitive shooting at all. She looked down at the medal in her hand, running her thumb over the engraved date. Her father had won this when everyone doubted him too. He had been an unconventional shooter in his time, using techniques that baffled traditionalists but somehow worked for him. The stories said he could shoot accurately in conditions that would paralyze other marksmen. He could maintain focus when others crumbled under pressure. He saw angles and opportunities that escaped conventional thinking. The wind picked up, rustling the leaves around the cemetery. Sarah made her decision. She would honor her father's legacy by trusting his methods, even if the entire shooting community thought she was making a mistake. She would rely on the secret training, the unconventional preparation that only the 2 of them understood. She would prove that his approach, strange as it seemed, had built something powerful within her. As she walked back to her car, Sarah didn't notice the elderly man watching from behind a nearby oak tree. He had attended the funeral months ago but stayed in the shadows unknown to the family. His name was Thomas Wei, and he had served with Captain Chen in the military 30 years ago. He knew secrets about Michael Chen's training methods that even Sarah didn't fully understand yet. He knew why the captain had trained his daughter in such unusual ways, and he knew that Sarah was about to face challenges that would test everything her father had built into her. Thomas had debated whether to reveal himself, whether to explain the full story behind Captain Chen's methods, but he decided to wait and watch. If Sarah was truly her father's daughter, if the training had taken root as deeply as Michael believed it had, she would figure it out on her own. She would discover that her father hadn't been teaching her just to shoot. He had been teaching her to think differently, to adapt instantly, to find calm in chaos, and to trust herself when everyone else doubted. The national selection trials would be unlike anything Sarah had experienced before. The pressure, the scrutiny, the high stakes would separate the merely good from the truly exceptional, and somewhere in those 4 months of preparation, Sarah would need to unlock the real purpose behind all those strange training sessions. She would need to understand that her father hadn't been eccentric or outdated. He had been preparing her for something specific, something that traditional training could never address. As Sarah drove away from the cemetery, the medal sat on the passenger seat beside her, catching the morning light. She didn't know it yet, but that piece of bronze would become her anchor in the storms ahead. It would remind her, when doubt crept in and critics grew louder, that unconventional doesn't mean wrong. Sometimes the path less traveled isn't just different. Sometimes it's the only path that leads to greatness. The shooting range was nearly empty when Sarah arrived at dawn, just as she preferred. She set up her equipment at Lane 7, the same spot where her father had coached her for years. The familiar smell of gun oil and concrete brought both comfort and pain. Every corner of this place held memories of his voice, his corrections, his rare but precious words of praise. She placed her father's medal on the small shelf beside her shooting position. It would stay there during every practice session from now on, a silent witness to her journey. As she loaded her pistol, Sarah's phone buzzed with messages from the shooting club's group chat. The news had spread quickly. She had declined Robert Martinez's coaching offer. Is Sarah Chen serious about competing alone? One message read. Another shooter commented, without proper coaching, she's throwing away her only chance at nationals. Even some of her former training partners expressed concern. The consensus was clear. Everyone thought she was making an emotional decision that would destroy her competitive career. But Sarah had a plan, even if no one else understood it. She would spend the first month revisiting every unconventional drill her father had taught her, trying to understand the deeper purpose behind each one. The second month would focus on integrating these skills with actual competitive shooting. The final 2 months would be pure preparation for the trials, combining everything she had learned. She started with the darkness drill. Sarah turned off all the lights in her section of the range, standing in complete blackness with her unloaded pistol. Her father had made her do this hundreds of times. Close your eyes and feel the gun become part of your hand, he used to say. The weapon should be an extension of your intention, not a separate tool you're trying to control. In the darkness, Sarah raised her pistol and went through the motion of aiming at the invisible target downrange. Without sight to guide her, she had to rely on muscle memory, on the weight distribution in her stance, on the angle of her arm. After 30 minutes, she turned the lights back on and checked her position in the mirror. Her form was nearly perfect, aligned precisely as it should be. Next came the chaos training. Sarah put on her headphones and played a recording her father had made. A jarring mix of sirens, shouting, music at different volumes, and random loud sounds. While this cacophony blasted in her ears, she practiced her shooting routine. Load, aim, breathe, squeeze. Load, aim, breathe, squeeze. The noise tried to shatter her concentration, but Sarah pushed through, finding islands of calm within the storm of sound. After 2 hours of practice, she was exhausted but noticed something remarkable. Her hands were steadier than they had been in months. The mental strain of blocking out chaos seemed to make normal shooting feel almost easy by comparison. Maybe her father's methods weren't so crazy after all. As Sarah packed up her equipment, Robert Martinez entered the range with 3 of his students. They were all top-ranked shooters, the kind of competitors Sarah would face at the trials. Martinez saw her and walked over, his expression a mix of concern and disappointment. "Sarah, I heard about your decision," he said gently. "I want you to know the offer still stands. It's not too late to train properly." Sarah met his eyes steadily. "I appreciate that, Coach Martinez. But I'm training the way my father taught me. I need to trust his methods." One of Martinez's students, a sharp-featured young woman named Jessica Tam, couldn't hide her smirk. Jessica was currently ranked 2nd in the region and was considered a lock for the national team. "I mean no disrespect to your father," Jessica said, though her tone suggested otherwise. "But sentimental training won't beat technique and discipline. The trials aren't about feelings. They're about performance." Martinez gave Jessica a warning look but didn't contradict her. He turned back to Sarah with something almost like pity in his eyes. Your father was a good man, Sarah, but the sport has evolved. The competition has gotten fiercer. Unconventional methods might have worked 30 years ago, but not anymore. After they left, Sarah sat alone on the bench, doubt creeping in like cold water. What if they were right? What if she was honoring her father's memory by destroying her own future? She picked up the bronze medal and studied it closely for the first time. On the back, beneath the engraving of her father's name and the year he won, she noticed something she had never seen before. Tiny words, almost microscopic, etched into the medal. Trust the foundation. Her phone rang. The caller ID showed an unknown number. Sarah almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. Miss Chen, this is Thomas Wei. I was a friend of your father's. We served together many years ago. Sarah's heart quickened. I remember you from the funeral. You didn't stay to talk to the family? I apologize for that, Thomas said. I wasn't sure if I should involve myself. But I've been hearing things about your training for the trials, and I think we need to talk. Your father's methods weren't random, Sarah. Every drill had a specific purpose. He was preparing you for something particular. What do you mean? Thomas hesitated. Not over the phone. Can we meet? There's something you need to understand about why your father trained you the way he did. It involves a situation from his military days, something that shaped his entire philosophy about shooting and pressure. They agreed to meet the next morning at a coffee shop near the range. As Sarah hung up, she felt a strange mix of excitement and nervousness. Maybe she was about to discover the missing piece of the puzzle, the reason behind all those years of unconventional training. That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. She lay in bed replaying memories of training sessions with her father, the time he made her shoot while standing on one leg, claiming it would improve her balance awareness, the exercises where she had to switch between targets of different sizes at random intervals, training her eyes to adjust rapidly, the meditation sessions before shooting, where he taught her to empty her mind of all thought except the present moment. At the time, these drills seemed eccentric, almost silly. Other shooters did straightforward practice. They shot thousands of rounds at targets, perfecting their technique through pure repetition. They studied biomechanics and physics. They used the latest equipment and training aids. But now, lying in the darkness of her room, Sarah began to sense a pattern in her father's training. He hadn't been teaching her to shoot well under ideal conditions. He had been teaching her to shoot well under impossible conditions. He was building mental flexibility, emotional resilience, and the ability to adapt when everything went wrong. The question was, why? What had happened in his past that made him believe this kind of training was necessary? And what did it have to do with the trials she would face in just a few months? Sarah reached over to her nightstand and touched the medal one more time before closing her eyes. Whatever Thomas Wei revealed tomorrow, whatever secrets her father had kept, she was ready to hear them. The path ahead was unclear, but Sarah was beginning to believe that unclear didn't mean wrong. Sometimes the hardest paths led to the most important destinations. The coffee shop was quiet when Sarah arrived, finding Thomas Wei already seated in a corner booth with 2 cups of tea in front of him. He was in his late 60s, with silver hair and the rigid posture of a military man. His eyes were sharp and assessing, the kind that missed nothing. I ordered you tea, Thomas said as Sarah sat down. Your father always preferred tea over coffee. Said it calmed the mind before shooting. Sarah wrapped her hands around the warm cup. You said his training methods had a specific purpose. What did you mean? Thomas leaned back, his expression becoming distant as if looking into the past. 30 years ago, your father and I were part of a special military unit. We were deployed to a conflict zone where conditions were unpredictable and extremely dangerous. One mission changed everything. He paused, sipping his tea before continuing. We were tasked with providing security for a critical operation. Michael was one of our sharpshooters. During the mission, everything that could go wrong did go wrong. Communications failed. The weather turned violent. Intelligence was incorrect. And Michael had to make shots that no training had prepared him for. Sarah listened intently as Thomas described the chaos of that day. Her father had been positioned to cover his team's extraction when enemy forces appeared from an unexpected direction. He had to shoot in heavy rain with failing equipment, while explosions disrupted his concentration. The angles were wrong. The distances weren't what he'd practiced for. Nothing matched the controlled conditions of his training. Most shooters would have fallen apart, Thomas said. But your father did something extraordinary. He adapted in real time. He made shots that seemed impossible, not because his technique was perfect, but because his mind was flexible enough to adjust to chaos. He saved 8 lives that day, including mine. Thomas reached into his jacket and pulled out an old, faded photograph. It showed a group of soldiers, younger versions of Thomas and Captain Chen among them. They were all smiling, but their eyes held the weight of what they'd experienced. After that mission, Michael became obsessed with understanding what happened. Why was he able to adapt when others couldn't? He started studying psychology, neuroscience, anything that could explain it. He concluded that traditional training was too rigid. It prepared you for ideal conditions, but life, especially high-pressure situations, rarely provides ideal conditions. Sarah felt pieces clicking into place. So all those unusual drills, the darkness, the chaos, the distractions, he was training me to adapt. Exactly, Thomas confirmed. But there's more. Michael didn't just want you to be a good shooter. He wanted you to be an adaptive thinker. That's why he made you solve math problems while shooting or recite poetry. He was training both sides of your brain to work together under pressure. He was building mental pathways that traditional training never touches. Thomas slid a small notebook across the table. He left this with me 6 months before he died. Asked me to give it to you if you ever pursued the Nationals without a traditional coach. He knew there might come a time when you'd need to understand the full picture. Sarah opened the notebook with trembling hands. Inside were detailed notes in her father's handwriting, explaining the purpose behind each training drill. The darkness. Exercises weren't just about muscle memory, but about building confidence in her subconscious competence. The chaos training was about creating mental resilience and the ability to find focus anywhere, anytime. The switching between left and right hands was about neural plasticity, making her brain more adaptable to change. One entry particularly struck her. Competitive shooting at the highest level isn't won by whoever has the most perfect technique. It's won by whoever can maintain their technique when everything falls apart. Sarah will face moments when nothing goes as planned. Her equipment might malfunction. The conditions might be terrible. The pressure might be crushing. That's when traditional training fails. That's when adaptive training wins. The national selection trials, Sarah whispered, understanding flooding through her. He knew they would throw challenges at us. Thomas nodded. The trials aren't like regular competitions. They're designed to test more than technical skill. They change conditions, add pressure variables, create scenarios that reveal who can truly perform under any circumstance. Your father studied every trial going back 20 years. He knew exactly what you'd face. Sarah felt overwhelmed and empowered at the same time. Her father hadn't been eccentric or outdated. He had been strategic, preparing her specifically for the most demanding test in competitive shooting. Every strange drill suddenly made perfect sense. But there's something you should know, Thomas added, his voice serious. Robert Martinez is a skilled coach, and his methods work for many shooters. Jessica Tam and others trained by him are genuinely good. They have technical excellence that you can't ignore. Your advantage isn't that you're better trained in the traditional sense. Your advantage is that you're trained differently. You can do things they can't, but they can also do things you might not be able to. This sobered Sarah. She wasn't suddenly guaranteed to win. She had a different kind of preparation, but that didn't make victory automatic. She would still need to be smart, strategic, and willing to face her own weaknesses. What do I do now? Sarah asked. Thomas smiled slightly. You do what your father would tell you to do. You trust the foundation he built, but continue building on it. Use the next 3 months wisely. The notebook has his full training plan for pre-trials preparation. Follow it, but also make it your own. He gave you tools, Sarah. How you use them is up to you. As Sarah left the coffee shop with the notebook clutched to her chest, she felt different. The doubt that had plagued her was replaced by determination. She finally understood what her father had been building all those years. Not just a shooter, but a thinker. Not just technical skill, but mental flexibility. Not just perfect form, but the ability to maintain that form when perfection became impossible. Back at home, Sarah spread the notebook across her desk and began reading every page carefully. Her father had documented years of research, observations, and training philosophy. He'd created a complete system designed for one purpose: to prepare her for the moment when conventional thinking wouldn't be enough. The first entry in the notebook was dated 10 years ago, when Sarah was just 14. Today I watched Sarah's first competition. She has natural talent, but the other coaches will try to mold her into their image of a shooter. They will teach her the right way, the traditional way. My job is to teach her something else. My job is to teach her to think beyond the obvious, to adapt beyond the expected, to perform beyond the usual limits. If I do this right, one day she will face impossible conditions and succeed where others fail. That's not just being a good shooter, that's being extraordinary. Tears filled Sarah's eyes as she realized the depth of her father's vision. He had been planning this journey for her entire competitive career. Every drill, every strange exercise, every moment of unconventional training was a piece of a larger strategy that she was only now beginning to fully comprehend. She looked at the medal on her desk, the small words on the back now making complete sense. Trust the foundation. Her father had built something remarkable within her, something that went deeper than technique, stronger than doubt, and more powerful than conventional wisdom. The trials were 3 months away. Sarah had work to do, but now she understood exactly what that work was. She wasn't trying to be the most technically perfect shooter. She was trying to be the most adaptable one. And that made all the difference. The next 8 weeks passed in a blur of intense preparation. Sarah followed her father's training plan religiously, but as Thomas suggested, she also adapted it to her own needs. She spent mornings at the range working through the unconventional drills, afternoons studying footage of past national trials, and evenings doing mental conditioning exercises that her father had outlined in the notebook. The notebook became her Bible. Each page revealed new insights into her father's philosophy. One section detailed how to maintain focus during equipment malfunctions. Another explained techniques for shooting in extreme weather conditions. There were even psychological exercises for handling hostile crowds and dealing with judges who might be biased. What surprised Sarah most was a section on learning from traditional training. Her father hadn't dismissed conventional methods entirely. Instead, he wrote, "Traditional training teaches consistency and form. These are valuable. Sarah should understand them, respect them, but not be limited by them. The goal is to be fluent in both languages, conventional and adaptive." Taking this advice, Sarah began attending open shooting sessions at the club where she could observe Martinez's students. She watched their technique, their preparation routines, their mental approaches. Jessica Tam in particular was impressive. Her form was textbook perfect, her consistency remarkable. Sarah could see why Jessica was ranked so high. But Sarah also noticed something interesting. When conditions were perfect, Jessica and the other traditionally trained shooters were exceptional. However, on days when the range's ventilation system was loud, or when there was construction noise outside, or when the lighting was slightly off, their performance dipped noticeably. They seemed uncomfortable with anything that deviated from their expected conditions. Sarah, meanwhile, had been training specifically for deviation from expected conditions. She started adding her own variations to her father's drills. She practiced with different pistols, adjusting to unfamiliar weight distributions. She shot after doing intense physical exercise, learning to steady her breathing when her heart was racing. She even practiced while slightly hungry or tired, understanding that the trials might last for hours under uncomfortable conditions. 6 weeks before the trials, Sarah received unexpected news. The National Selection Committee had announced a change in format. Instead of the traditional 2-day competition, they were introducing a 3-day event with new elements designed to test real-world shooting capability under varied conditions. The announcement sent ripples through the competitive shooting community. Coaches scrambled to adjust training plans. Shooters who had prepared for the standard format now faced uncertainty. The club's group chat exploded with anxiety and speculation. Sarah read the announcement with a strange sense of calm. The new format included surprise elements. Shooters wouldn't know all the conditions until they arrived for each stage. There would be environmental variables, equipment challenges, and timed pressure situations that mimicked real-world scenarios rather than controlled competition settings. It was almost as if the trials had been designed specifically for someone trained the way Sarah had been trained. Robert Martinez called a special meeting for all serious competitors at the club. Sarah attended, sitting in the back of the room as Martinez addressed the group of worried shooters. "I won't lie to you," Martinez said. "This format change is challenging. It reduces the advantage of pure technical training. But don't panic. We'll adapt our preparation. We'll practice more varied conditions. We'll do mock scenarios. You're all excellent shooters and we'll make sure you're ready." After the meeting, Jessica Tam approached Sarah. Her usual confidence seemed slightly shaken. "I guess your dad's crazy training doesn't look so crazy now," she said, attempting a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "It was never crazy," Sarah replied quietly. "Just different." Jessica nodded slowly. "Look, I've been pretty dismissive of you. I'm sorry for that. I thought traditional training was the only real way. But maybe there's room for different approaches. Could we maybe train together sometime? I think I could learn from your methods, and you could probably benefit from some technical refinement." Sarah was surprised by the offer, but saw the sincerity in Jessica's eyes. "I'd like that." Over the next 3 weeks, an unlikely partnership formed. Sarah and Jessica met several times a week, sharing their different training philosophies. Jessica helped Sarah refine some technical aspects of her form, small adjustments that improved her consistency. In return, Sarah introduced Jessica to some of her father's adaptive drills, helping her become more flexible in her thinking. "This is wild," Jessica said one day, as Sarah had her practice shooting while listening to chaotic sounds through headphones. "I can barely concentrate. How do you do this regularly?" "You learn to find quiet within the noise," Sarah explained. "My father used to say that perfect conditions are a luxury. Champions are made by training for imperfect conditions." As the trials drew closer, Sarah noticed a transformation in herself. She was no longer the uncertain girl standing at her father's grave, torn between honoring his methods and following conventional wisdom. She had become someone who understood that the most powerful approach was integrating the best of both worlds, the consistency of traditional training and the adaptability of unconventional methods. 2 weeks before the trials, Thomas Way visited Sarah at the range. He watched her practice for 30 minutes without saying a word, his experienced eye evaluating every movement, every decision, every adjustment she made. Finally, he spoke. "Your father would be proud. You've taken his foundation and built something even better on it. You're not just copying his methods. You're understanding the principles behind them and making them your own." "I'm still nervous," Sarah admitted. "Jessica is incredibly good. So are at least 5 other shooters I know. They all have their own strengths." "Good," Thomas said. "Your father wrote something in that notebook about confidence versus arrogance. Do you remember it?" Sarah nodded, reciting from memory. "True confidence comes from knowing you're prepared for anything, not from believing you're better than everyone. Arrogance assumes victory. Confidence earns it." "Exactly. You're nervous because you respect the challenge in your competitors. That's healthy. But don't let respect become doubt. You have abilities that others don't have, and they have abilities you don't have. The question isn't who's better in general. The question is who's better prepared for what these specific trials will demand." The week before the trials, Sarah did something her father had instructed in the final pages of his notebook. She took 3 days completely away from shooting. No practice, no studying footage, no thinking about competition. Instead, she hiked, read novels, spent time with friends, and let her mind and body rest. "The weapon needs maintenance," her father had written. But so does the warrior. Mental and physical freshness matter more than squeezing in extra practice when you're already prepared. Trust that the training is done. Trust that you're ready. Give yourself permission to simply exist peacefully before the battle. On the night before leaving for the trials, Sarah sat in her room with her father's medal in her hands. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, the years of unconventional training, the loss of her father, the doubt and criticism, the discovery of his true purpose, and the preparation that had consumed the last 3 months. She thought about the young soldiers in that faded photograph Thomas had shown her, her father among them, facing impossible situations and finding ways to succeed. She thought about the 8 lives he saved through his ability to adapt when everything went wrong. Now it was her turn, not to save lives, but to prove that his methods, his philosophy, his legacy had value, not just for her, but for everyone who had ever been told their way of thinking was wrong simply because it was different. Sarah placed the medal in her equipment bag, where it would travel with her to the trials. Then she lay down and surprisingly fell asleep almost immediately. Her subconscious mind knew what her conscious mind was still learning. She was as ready as she would ever be. The foundation was solid. The preparation was complete. What remained was simply to trust herself and perform. The National Training Center was more intimidating than Sarah had imagined. The massive facility housed multiple shooting ranges, each designed for different disciplines and conditions. Hundreds of competitors had arrived from across the country, all vying for one of the 3 coveted spots on the national team. The atmosphere was thick with tension and barely concealed anxiety. Sarah checked into her assigned housing and immediately set up her small space. She placed her father's medal on the nightstand where she could see it first thing every morning. That bronze disc had become more than a keepsake. It was a reminder of everything she had learned, everything she carried within her. The opening ceremony was held that evening. Officials explained the new trial format in detail, and with each word, Sarah understood more clearly why her father's training had been so specific. The first day would test technical proficiency under standard conditions, but with surprise equipment assigned randomly. Shooters wouldn't use their own familiar guns, but would be given different models to test their adaptability. The second day would introduce environmental variables. Some shooting sessions would be conducted outdoors with wind and temperature changes. Others would have controlled distractions, noise, movement, altered lighting. The goal was to see who could maintain performance when conditions shifted. The third day would be the ultimate test. Competitors who survived the cuts would face scenario-based challenges designed to simulate real-world pressure situations. The exact nature of these scenarios would remain secret until the moment they began. As the officials finished explaining the format, Sarah glanced around the auditorium. Many faces showed worry. Even Robert Martinez, seated with his group of students, looked concerned. But Jessica caught Sarah's eye from across the room and gave her a small, knowing smile. They both understood that while this format was intimidating to most, it played directly to strengths that Sarah had been developing for years. The first day began at dawn. Competitors were called in groups and assigned their equipment randomly. Sarah drew a pistol she had never used before, a different model from her usual gun with a different weight balance and trigger pressure. Around her, she heard groans and worried whispers as other shooters got unfamiliar equipment. Sarah remembered one of her father's drills. He had regularly made her practice with different weapons, sometimes borrowing guns from other club members just so she could learn to adapt quickly. She took 5 minutes to familiarize herself with the new pistol, feeling its weight, testing its balance, dry firing to understand the trigger. When the shooting began, Sarah's scores were solid but not exceptional. She was in the middle of the pack after the morning session. Jessica Tam, despite having different equipment, managed to stay in the top 10 through sheer technical excellence. Martinez's training showed its strength here. Perfect form could compensate for equipment changes if the fundamentals were strong enough. But as the day progressed and shooters did multiple sessions with different assigned equipment, Sarah noticed something. Her scores remained consistent while others fluctuated wildly. Some shooters posted excellent scores with one gun but struggled with another. Sarah's ability to adapt quickly meant her performance was steady across all equipment variations. By the end of day 1, Sarah had moved up to 15th place overall. Not spectacular, but she had survived the cut that eliminated the bottom third of competitors. More importantly, she felt confident. The equipment randomization hadn't rattled her the way it had others. That evening, Jessica found Sarah in the practice area, where competitors could do light training between trial days. "You were right about the adaptive training," Jessica said. "I watched you today. You barely flinched when you got unfamiliar equipment. Meanwhile, I was freaking out internally every time. You still finished in the top 10, Sarah pointed out. Barely. And tomorrow's going to be worse. Environmental variables? That's not something I've trained for much. Martinez is scrambling to give us strategies. But it's hard to prepare overnight for something you haven't practiced in months, Sarah. Felt sympathy for her friend, but also understood that this was where her father's unconventional methods would truly shine. You're a better technical shooter than I am, Jessica. Just remember that. Focus on what you do well, and don't let changing conditions make you abandon your strengths. Day 2 arrived with immediate challenges. The morning session was conducted outdoors with unpredictable wind gusts. Shooters had to adjust constantly for the wind's effect on their aim. Sarah had practiced this exact scenario. Her father had once made her shoot on a particularly stormy day, teaching her to read wind patterns and compensate instinctively. She watched other shooters struggle, trying to calculate wind adjustments intellectually. By the time they figured out the compensation needed, the wind had changed again. Sarah didn't calculate. She felt it, adjusted intuitively, and shot. Her scores that morning were among the best in her group. The afternoon brought a different challenge. The indoor range had been set up with random noise distractions. Construction sounds, loud music at varying volumes, even recordings of hostile crowds shouting. This was almost exactly like her chaos training. While other shooters visibly struggled to maintain concentration, Sarah slipped into the mental state her father had taught her. She found the quiet space within her mind where the noise couldn't penetrate. By the end of day 2, Sarah had rocketed to 5th place overall. The consistency of her performance across varied conditions had impressed the judges and shocked most of her competitors. Robert Martinez approached her after the day's rankings were posted. "I need to apologize," he said directly. "I dismissed your father's methods as outdated, but I'm watching you perform and realizing I was wrong. What he taught you has real value. I'm sorry I didn't see it before." Sarah appreciated his honesty. "Different approaches work for different people, Coach Martinez. Your methods have produced champions too. There isn't one right way." "Maybe," Martinez said thoughtfully, "but there might be a better way than what I've been teaching. After these trials, if you're willing, I'd like to learn more about your training philosophy. Perhaps we can combine approaches." That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about the third and final day. The scenario-based challenges were designed to push shooters to their absolute limits. She didn't know what specific situations they would create, but she trusted that whatever came, her father had prepared her for the fundamental challenge, maintaining performance when everything fell apart. She picked up her father's medal from the nightstand, running her thumb over the engraved words on the back. Trust the foundation. The foundation was adaptability, mental flexibility, and the ability to think clearly under pressure. Tomorrow would test whether that foundation was truly as strong as her father had believed. The morning of day 3, only 40 shooters remained from the original field of over 200. These were the best competitors in the country, all fighting for 3 spots on the national team. The atmosphere was electric with tension. The first scenario was announced. Shooters would be given a malfunction mid-session. Their equipment would jam or fail in some way, and they would need to troubleshoot and continue shooting within a strict time limit. This wasn't just about shooting accuracy. It was about problem-solving under pressure. Sarah remembered a section in her father's notebook about equipment failure protocols. He had written, "The weapon is a tool, but the real weapon is your mind. If the tool fails, the mind must adapt." She had practiced malfunction drills, but more importantly, she had trained not to panic when things went wrong. When her pistol jammed during the scenario, Sarah's hands moved calmly through the clearance procedure. She didn't rush, didn't panic, just executed the steps methodically while the clock ticked. She cleared the jam, resumed shooting, and finished within the time limit with a respectable score. Around her, other shooters weren't as fortunate. Some panicked when their equipment failed, making mistakes that turned into time-consuming errors. Jessica Tam managed her malfunction well but took longer than Sarah, losing precious seconds. The second scenario was even more demanding. Shooters had to perform while dealing with a simulated hostile environment. Judges and assistants stood nearby making critical comments, questioning the shooter's ability, creating psychological pressure designed to break concentration. This was the ultimate test of mental resilience. Technical skill didn't matter if your mind crumbled under psychological assault. Sarah remembered her father's words. "Hostile voices are just noise. Your inner voice is the only one that matters." As judges criticized her form, questioned her capability, and suggested she wasn't good enough for the national team, Sarah found that quiet space in her mind. The voices became background noise, no different from the chaotic sounds in her training exercises. She shot steadily, her face calm, her hands sure. When the final scenario ended, Sarah returned to the waiting area in a daze. She had given everything, used every skill her father had taught her, trusted every aspect of her unconventional training. Now there was nothing to do but wait for the results. The waiting room was silent except for the quiet breathing of exhausted competitors. Sarah sat with her eyes closed, not from fatigue, but from a deliberate attempt to stay centered. The final calculations were being completed. Within the hour, they would announce the 3 shooters who would represent the country at the international championships. Jessica sat beside her, bouncing her leg nervously. "I think I did okay," she whispered. "But those last scenarios were brutal. How do you stay so calm?" Sarah opened her eyes and looked at her friend. "Years of training to find calm in chaos. My father started teaching me that when I was 12, even though I didn't understand why at the time. I used to think that was a waste of training time," Jessica admitted. "I thought you should spend every minute perfecting your technique. But watching you these 3 days, I realized technique is only part of the equation. Mental strength might be even more important." Before Sarah could respond, the head official entered the room. The nervous energy became almost unbearable. 40 exhausted, anxious shooters waited to hear which 3 would achieve their dreams. "First, I want to congratulate everyone here," the official began. "You've all demonstrated exceptional skill. The new format was specifically designed to test not just technical ability but adaptability, resilience, and real-world performance capability. We believe these qualities define the modern competitive shooter." He paused, looking around the room. "The 3 shooters who will represent our country at the international championships, in no particular order, are Jessica Tam, Marcus Rodriguez, and Sarah Chen." For a moment, Sarah couldn't process what she'd heard. Her name. They had called her name. She had made the national team. Jessica grabbed her in a fierce hug, both of them crying and laughing at the same time. Around them, some competitors celebrated while others fought back disappointment. Marcus Rodriguez, a veteran shooter Sarah didn't know well, nodded at her with respect across the room. The official continued with details about training schedules and preparation for the international competition, but Sarah barely heard him. All she could think about was her father. He had seen this moment years ago when others saw only an eccentric coach wasting his daughter's potential. He had prepared her for this exact challenge when conventional wisdom said his methods were outdated. After the announcement, as competitors slowly dispersed, Robert Martinez approached the 3 selected shooters. "Congratulations to all of you. Sarah, Jessica, I'll be one of the assistant coaches for the national team. I look forward to working with both of you." He turned specifically to Sarah. "I've already spoken with the head coach. We want to incorporate some of your training methods into the national team's preparation. Your father's approach to adaptive training is something we all need to learn from." Sarah felt a swell of emotion. Her father's legacy wasn't just about her success. It was about changing how people thought about training and preparation. "He would have been honored," she said quietly. That evening, Sarah returned to her room and picked up her phone. She had dozens of messages from friends, family, and members of her shooting club, but first she called Thomas Way. "I heard the news," Thomas said immediately. "Sarah, your father would be bursting with pride right now." "I wish he could have seen it," Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion. "He did see it," Thomas replied firmly. "Maybe not with his eyes, but he saw it in his mind years ago. Every drill he designed, every unusual exercise he put you through, he was seeing this moment. He had absolute faith that if you trusted his methods, they would lead you here." After hanging up with Thomas, Sarah sat on her bed with her father's medal. She thought about the journey from his funeral to this moment. The doubt, the criticism, the discovery of his notebook, the realization of his true purpose, and finally, the validation of everything he had taught her. But Sarah understood something important now. This wasn't really about validation. Her father's methods didn't need validation from a competition. They had value regardless of whether she won or lost. The real lesson was simpler and more profound. There are many paths to excellence, and the unconventional path isn't wrong, just because it's different. She opened her father's notebook one more time, flipping to the last page. She had read it before but hadn't fully understood it until now. His final entry, written just weeks before his death, read, "Sarah, If you're reading this, it means you've chosen to trust what I taught you even when others doubted. I'm proud of you not because you might win, but because you had the courage to walk a different path. The world will always pressure you to conform, to follow the established way, to abandon anything that seems unconventional. But some of the most important progress in human history came from people who refused to accept that there was only one right way to do things. I didn't train you the way I did just to make you a good shooter. I trained you to be someone who thinks independently, who adapts to challenges, and who trusts herself even when everyone else says she's wrong. These qualities will serve you in every area of life, not just competition. Whatever happens at the trials, remember that success isn't just about winning. It's about becoming the best version of yourself and having the courage to pursue that even when the path is uncertain. I love you, and I'm proud of who you've become. Tears streamed down Sarah's face as she read her father's words. He had given her so much more than shooting skills. He had given her a philosophy for life itself. The next morning, Sarah woke to find several news articles about the trials. One headline read, "Unconventional training methods prove effective at national selection trials." The article described her background, her father's unusual approach, and how the new trial format had favored adaptive skills over pure technical training. The article quoted Robert Martinez. "Sarah Chen's performance has opened my eyes to the limitations of purely traditional training. Captain Chen was ahead of his time in understanding that modern competition requires mental flexibility and adaptability as much as technical perfection. The shooting community needs to learn from his methods." Sarah's phone rang. It was a reporter requesting an interview about her father's training philosophy. Then another call came, and another. Shooting coaches from around the country wanted to know more about Captain Chen's methods. The unconventional approach that had been dismissed and mocked was suddenly being studied and respected. Over the following weeks, as Sarah began training with the national team, she noticed something remarkable. Coaches were incorporating elements of her father's approach into the standard training regimen. Darkness drills, chaos training, equipment variation exercises. All the things that had once seemed eccentric were now being recognized as valuable tools. Jessica pulled Sarah aside during one training session. "You know what's funny? 6 months ago, I thought your training was crazy. Now I'm doing darkness drills and chaos exercises, and my performance is actually improving. Your dad was a genius." "He was just someone who thought differently," Sarah said. "And he had the courage to follow his thinking even when no one agreed with him." 3 months later, Sarah stood at the international championships, competing against the best shooters from around the world. The competition was fierce and the pressure immense. But when Sarah stepped up to shoot, she felt her father's presence like a steady hand on her shoulder. She didn't win the international competition. She placed 5th, a respectable showing for her first international event. But Jessica took 2nd place, and Marcus Rodriguez won bronze. The national team performed exceptionally well, and much of the credit went to the integrated training approach that combined traditional technique with adaptive skills. After the competition, Sarah returned home and went directly to her father's grave. She placed his bronze medal on the headstone, then stepped back and spoke to him as if he could hear. "You were right about everything. The training, the methods, the philosophy. But more than that, you were right about courage. It takes courage to be different, to trust yourself when everyone doubts you, to walk an unconventional path. You taught me that, and it's a lesson I'll carry forever." She left the medal there, no longer needing it as a talisman. Her father's true legacy wasn't metal and bronze. It was the foundation he had built within her, the adaptive mindset he had developed, and the courage to trust herself that he had instilled. As Sarah walked away from the cemetery, she thought about her future. She would continue competing, but she also wanted to coach. She wanted to teach other young shooters that there wasn't just one right way to achieve excellence. She wanted to carry forward her father's philosophy, showing others that unconventional thinking could lead to extraordinary results. The world needed more people who had the courage to think differently, to challenge established methods, and to trust themselves even when the path was uncertain. Sarah's father had been one of those people. Now, with his medal as proof and his methods as vindication, Sarah would be another. She would prove again and again that the power of unconventional training wasn't just about shooting. It was about life itself. It was about adapting to challenges, finding calm in chaos, and maintaining your core strength even when everything around you falls apart. These lessons, taught through strange drills and unconven,